And when I was in policing and investigating policing, I had incredible pushback when I was director for London and I was investigating the Met Police. Actually, I expected the pushback externally from the Met Police. That was what it was. I knew that would happen. But the hardest pushback that I got was inside my own organisation.
My guest is the award-winning leadership advocate and best-selling author, Sal Naseem, known for linking systemic reform to personal accountability. As the former regional director for London at the Independent Office for Police Conduct, he led investigations into police misconduct, corruption, and community trust. He uses his platform to highlight issues like male allyship, mental health, resilience, and institutional bias and racism, often referencing real-life cases from his own experience. Unlike many DEI voices, his insights are based on his real experiences, both from his personal perspective, but also professional at the very highest level in public service.
It went beyond policing about how racism was actually baked into the systems and policies of organisation. It wasn't actually about individuals being racist. It was about the consequence of policies that resulted in net racism and what that looked like. So it's focused on policing, but it went broader. But one of the things he recommended in his report was the creation of an independent organisation that was capable of investigating the worst forms of police corruption, police misconduct, separate from the police. Because up until that point, Tim, it was the police that essentially marked their own homework. They investigated themselves for some of the most serious matters. And in the Stephen Lawrence case, that exposed all the weaknesses of that. If you look at the rioters last year, those riots that were stoked by the far right, and people including Farage, there was a statistic that came out which said that 40% of the convicted rioters had a history of domestic abuse. Men convicted of being violent against women. 40%. Now, I'd like to see some analysis for some of these people going out on these marches, protesting outside these asylum seeker hotels, saying that they're there to protect women's safety. There's a system out there designed to put the fear of God into the majority, that people like me are the enemy, when all I care about is paying my mortgage, making sure my kids have a good education, am I doing the best that I can as a dad, and what the hell am I going to watch on Netflix tonight because I spend 15 minutes flicking and I never get to the right thing and I just waste 15 minutes of my life every time. My fears and hopes are the same as the majority of people, but if you listen and you get sucked in to this vortex of hate at the minute, they'd have you believing otherwise. The conditions being created for people who are racist to be racist. Racism is something that's always been here, but it's never addressed properly. It has never been addressed sufficiently.
Not even in schools. Not even in schools.
And racism is rife now in schools because racism now has become fashionable again, has become acceptable again to a certain extent. It has. I'm seeing racism now, which I haven't seen since childhood.
This is a CEO Retort podcast, the show that fearlessly goes after the difficult topics that we all need to talk about, campaigns for issues that we're all concerned about, and invites some amazing, inspiring, and remarkable guests who will help us navigate through this fragile world that we all care about. I'm Tim Al-Sheikh. Let's get after it.
You are listening to CEO Retort.
As my wife and I were just joking, that there was this video of this black dude who has a very strong Scottish accent that went viral. And I was wondering, I wonder if this would happen the same here, because we have a British Muslim, Pakistani origin, with a very strong Scottish accent. Now, we've seen a lot of that in the UK, but I think people outside the UK, they'll be like, What?
Oh, this accent isn't strong anymore, Tim. You know, I've lived in England for about 18 years, so my accent is very diluted.
Really?
Yeah, but it is definitely a conversation starter. I mean, I worked in London for a long time, and in London, you have every accent in the world, hugely diverse city, and yet when a brown man opened his mouth with a Scottish accent, it seemed to melt a lot of people's minds. So I go against convention. Maybe it's fair to say.
That is actually reminds me with a conversation I had with Lee Chambers, because he's got a very strong northern accent. And he made a joke to me once that he was like, when he speaks to people over the phone, they think that he's white because he's like, I've got a white name with a proper northern white accent. So when I turn up, people are like, who are you? which is it's funny, but at the same time, it kind of highlights the problem that we were talking about in terms of that prejudice, right? And racism, etc. So before we go there, I think because we got a lot of listeners from outside the UK who might not know who you are, the work that you do. So could we start firstly with, in terms of your background, your work, to set the context for the conversation so that people outside the UK can understand where we're going?
I can do, yeah. So it's hard to describe all the stuff that I've done. So I think the easy way to describe it is I'm a former public servant. So I've had a career in public service. I spent a good chunk of my career investigating police misconduct in an independent organisation called the Independent Office for Police Conduct. So the worst forms of police corruption, complaints, deaths, all the really grisly things that you might see in the media. I was responsible for some of those things. I was director for London, so I was involved in a lot of higher profile matters. So I spent the best part of a decade there, but I've worked across a range of systems. So I've sat on the board of the Electoral Commission, helping ensure democracy in the UK, those processes were inclusive, and the organisation itself, its culture was inclusive. I've supported the National Fire Service with their work on institutional racism and misogyny. I've held a senior role in local government. I do some stuff around male violence against women and girls. I accidentally became a LinkedIn influencer, which was never the plan. And along the way, I wrote a best-selling book on values-based leadership. And now I'm intent on trying to promote this idea of the need for moral courage in our leadership.
Yeah, and I've absolutely. Well, I actually discovered you because of your book. I haven't read it yet, but I fell in love with the name True North. I thought that was just perfect, and I would love to delve into that probably later on. But the points that you highlighted now in terms of the work that you do, it basically ticks all the boxes of the problems that we're seeing today when it comes to politics, racism, police corruption. And of course, the rise of the far right, etc. And, when I was planning this episode, I thought, okay, where do we even start? Because everything, it's like we are going, to use the technical term, we seem to be going through some major clusterfuck of everything, and I'm like, okay, where do we even start? And I would think, okay, starting perhaps with Stephen Lawrence, perhaps as a historical milestone, unfortunately for the wrong reasons, but definitely it was the eye-opener in terms of systemic racism, the police, politics, etc. And this is basically, as I know, your career started from that point. So could we start there?
Yeah, so I joined that system over a decade ago. And the reason I joined that system was because of Stephen's murder. I was about the same age as Stephen Lawrence. So I remember following the story as a young man and seeing what happened, then understanding that, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, Sir William McPherson, the recommendations he made and what he said around institutional racism became really famous. It became like a landmark phrase, and it went beyond policing about how racism was actually baked into the systems and policies of organization. It wasn't actually about individuals being racist. It was about the consequence of policies that resulted in net racism and what that looked like. So it was focused on policing, but it went broader. But one of the things he recommended in his report was the creation of an independent organization that was capable of investigating the worst forms of police corruption, police misconduct, separate from the police. Because up until that point, Tim, it was the police that essentially marked their own homework. They investigated themselves for some of the most serious matters. And in the Stephen Lawrence case, that exposed all the weaknesses of that because, I don't need to go over that because people know what happened.
Yeah.
But it was from that moment that it sparked this interest. And when I seen an opening in that organization, I joined it. I didn't join as a director. I joined as a relatively junior manager, and I just worked my way up until I became director for London.
So how did you manage to reach to the top? Because you've reached pretty senior level. I mean, like on the national level, which, because I've seen your other interviews, but it's because what we have in the UK certainly is that what I like to describe them as the sort of the racist deniers, right? Who would say things like, "Oh, if somebody like Sal managed to reach all the way to the top, therefore there's no racism," which is like, okay. Well, what would be your response? Because you've reached to the top, but it wasn't really an easy journey, was it?
No. Racism is like this constant companion, Tim. Nobody tells you.
Yeah,
it looks different. It's different throughout my life. When I was a child, it was out in the open. You could see it, and you could feel when it came at you. As I grew up, it morphed, it changed, it hid in the shadows. So you couldn't really see it, but you could hear it, you could see its effects, and this would come in the form of policies or racial bias. And that's just been a constant in my career. We were the only family of colour to have grown up. When I grew up in Kilmarnock, which was a small town in Ayrshire in Scotland, first family of colour to move into that town. So I dealt with the consequences of that hatred and violence when I was young. But being the only one in the room has been a constant in my career. So essentially, when I have went through these roles, I've went through these jobs, and you've kindly described it as getting to the top. I don't know about that, but having a senior role, that has been a constant. So I've just been used to it, and and I remember my dad's advice, which was, you're going to have to work harder than everybody else for the same level of success. Now, there's two ways you can take it. Either you can get embittered, or you can embrace it. So I just embraced it. So every single role I had, I used to try and smash it out the park. And that was the mentality I adopted. But along the way, it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal, hitting concrete ceilings where you can't see the next level above you, then hitting glass ceilings where you can, but you're going to have to go through that glass ceiling and watch out for those shards. And dealing with all the crap that comes in between. I'd like to say it was a smooth path where I had sponsors and advocates and, I progressed this and it was all about this, but it wasn't. It was actually just a fight. It was a fight to be the best that I could and to be recognized for that and to consistently put myself up for situations where actually I was rejected, but eventually you do get through with persistence. And my career has just been a story of sticking to my values and persistence, because I'm Scottish and I'm just bloody stubborn and, sitting down. So there's a variety of things in there. But the point you made originally was around racism, and that was just a constant companion, even when I got to my most senior roles.
And of course, we combine that with Islamophobia as well. I mean, it seems, because I lived in different countries and I'm a mixed race myself, and probably in the most controversial way you can think of. Like, so for instance, in terms of religion, I've got all the three major religions, right? Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And if I ask anyone in any of these religions, they'll say to me that I have to follow that religion. Hence, I'm not following any of them. I'm totally out of all of them. But the thing that I certainly experienced, even before I moved to the UK when I was about 17. But I lived in the Middle East. I lived in different countries. And being a mixed race kind of opened up my eyes on humanity in general. Because I think when you go to different countries, especially here, for instance, like when people talk about racism, it's automatically perceived it's white versus black or black versus white. Or, for example, if people talk about religious prejudice, it's automatically about Islamophobia, but people don't talk much about, say, anti-Semitism, or there's even, I can't remember, there was a term, it's sort of kind of like prejudice against Hinduism and even Buddhism, things like that. And what I struggled with as a child, I didn't have an identity. Like I had a bit of an identity crisis. I didn't know about it then. I was sort of reflecting back at it. I know now because I was never good enough. Like, say the black community would never they would say to me, Tim, you're not black enough. Mm-hmm. Like, what the hell does that even mean? I had somebody even literally, like, thankfully I did not punch them in the face, but somebody in London said to me, yeah, you're not black enough to call yourself African. I was born and raised in Africa. And I'm like, okay, here's a tip for everybody. Do not go to any African person of whatever color and tell them they're not African. Like, you are asking for trouble. Luckily, I was surrounded with friends at the time. But that's just to give you an idea. There's this kind of natural prejudice that humans have, it seems. And I think the reason why I make this point, because I see so many silly debates that people say, well, racism it's all a black and white issue. But my argument is that it's a much wider problem that goes even beyond race and religion. It's like everybody has some kind of prejudice against the other human to an extent that they're willing for that other human to, die even. And I'm just, just from your point of view, because obviously you are campaigning for this, you're campaigning for equality, and, you're doing a lot of speeches in enterprises and so on. Why do we, is that human nature, or is it a cultural thing, or is it politics? In 2025, you would think we should not have any of that anymore. We must have learned lessons. Everybody goes on about that. We need to learn lessons, right? It's 2025. And to me, it just looks the same. Why?
Oh, there's a lot in that. So let me start off with this point you make about racism. Right. So I am a Pakistani Muslim man living in the UK. And I think, and it's not a competition that I particularly want to take in, but I think I may well be at the bottom rung of prejudice politically. If you look at how Pakistani Muslim men are used and demonized in the press, so openly and blatantly at the minute, we are very, very much the tool, the boogeyman that is being used to hate monger. So at the minute, I am feeling what it feels like to be in the crosshairs of particular politicians, of particular media, very, very acutely. So racism for me at the minute is really, racism and prejudice is a really, really intense and personal experience right now. 2025, I would say it's the worst I've ever known it. And
wow.
It's the worst I've ever known it. And I've grown up in a really tough environment. The point I would make here, Tim, because you're right, it's not just a black and white issue. It's not just a black and white issue. The issue here is that it suits certain individuals, let's be honest, people in certain positions of power to divide.
Yeah.
To divide along certain lines that, where does it end? Because we look at the rich tapestry of the human condition, and there are so many different shades, so many different faiths. And instead of it being something we want to be curious about, something we want to celebrate, something we want to find out, something we want to break bread over, it is played back against us in a different way, in a way that is very calculated and machinated to base fear on. So if you just take a look at some of the media out there, the right-wing media, some of the stations, and they will be telling you who to fear. They'll be telling you who to be afraid of, who to hate. If I'm being frank with you, who to hate. And we're seeing that, in terms of anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-Muslim sentiment, and hate towards trans community as well. There are certain communities who are being put up as red meat, saying it's their fault. The reason why your life isn't as good at the minute is because of them. They're not like us. No, the rest of you, no. You're part of it. You're one of us. It's their fault. When we all know the reality. Yeah. We all know the reality. When you look at the inequality stats, the people who are being demonized for the reason why everything is broken, everything is failing, are the ones that are suffering alongside, poor white people, the poor white working class. For instance, Muslims, 50% of Muslims live in some of the most deprived wards in the UK. Now, that's not a stat that they'll hand out and they'll bandy about. It's just one example. Inequality is the real issue. And inequality is actually where you should look to see who's affected by inequality. And that's where you will find a lot of common ground. And actually, when you then start to break it down a bit more, then you find power, wealth come into the equation. And then you discover, and I'm very conscious, it's not meant to sound like a conspiracy theory, but when you look at the right-wing press, when you look at the right-wing political think tanks, when you look at the right-wing media, and then you look who funds them, and you look at their agendas, and you see how that then plays into our politics. Yeah. There's a hidden connective thread there. And the long-winded point I'm making here, Tim, is that there's a system out there designed to put the fear of God into the majority, that people like me are the enemy. When all I care about is paying my mortgage, making sure my kids have a good education, am I doing the best that I can as a dad, and what the hell am I going to watch on Netflix tonight because I spend 15 minutes flicking and I never get to the right thing and I just waste 15 minutes of my life every time. My fears and hopes are the same as the majority of people. But if you listen and you get sucked in to this vortex of hate at the minute, they'd have you believing otherwise.
Yeah. And the media plays a huge role in this. I mean, you mentioned the media, and I always complain about the media. You probably... I don't know. Do you know Emma Monk? So we've already had 2 episodes together, and she's brilliant because she basically goes out there, debunks all the nonsense that is basically pushed by the media. And of course, you've got platforms like Twitter or X, owned by Elon Musk, who's one of those forces that basically fuel all that hate towards whatever minority you choose, right? Whatever that is the talking point. I mean, like right now, I invite people to try to remind themselves the last time they heard about transgender problems. Like, what was it? Until like the election of Donald Trump, it was all about the transgenders, and then immigration as well. Now the transgenders have somehow vanished. Now it's all about, the migrants, or in the UK, small boats. And Emma basically highlighted the problem that the poll that emerged was a few weeks ago, where people in the UK think that the vast majority of migrants in the UK are illegal migrants. Yet the reality, they only represent just under 4%. Right? So who's responsible for that? And people are going to say, it's social media. No, it's not. It's the media. Social media amplify it. And I've been involved in fighting misinformation for gazillions of years. And it's always been that, like, the media have always been the source. Now, whether it's intentional or not, of course, we can debate that. In my opinion, it is. Maybe back in the day, it wasn't intentional. But what the media have always been doing is that clickbaity headliner. And the headline doesn't necessarily correlate with what's inside the article. And one tip I always tell people as well, when you see the headline has quotes, that's what that's a red flag. Basically, they say, oh, I don't know, the vast majority of migrants are illegal. That means that that's absolute bullshit, that they're lying. But they have to protect themselves because apparently they're regulated. I don't know how that works. But they're absolutely, for me, are the culprits here. And they are controlled by just a handful of billionaires. Obviously, they have an agenda. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, because I'm starting to see American politicians especially, that they started to say things like the debate these days should not be about right or left anymore, because the people who are at the top, they don't really care anymore. It's everybody versus them. It's basically top versus bottom. We are all at the bottom, regardless of our politics. And we've got this bunch of pretty horrendous individual at the top, controlling the media, controlling the narrative, funding the likes of Farage in this country. They are the ones that we need to be fighting against. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Is it a right and left issue these days?
No, I mean, I was thinking about that. I mean, if you look at where the left wing, right wing came from, and it's a really archaic term.
Yeah.
It used to work. It used to work in this country when you had the old political parties and they stayed in their lane with Labour and Conservative. I know you've always had Lib Dems, but let's talk about Labour and Conservative. But where you are now, that doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work. It's an idea. It's idealistic to call things left wing, right wing, but actually the classification now doesn't work because we saw like right wing parties adopting things which Labour would traditionally have espoused, and it's really about populism.
Yes,
it's you're moving now beyond some of those classifications, and what you've got in the political landscape now is fascism. People are just afraid to call it what it is.
Why? This is the bit that I just don't understand. Why they're scared of using the F word? That is fascism, if it is fascism.
But I think generally people are afraid of putting their head above the parapet and saying anything controversial because it comes with consequences. If you're steeped in the system, to put your head above the parapet in any which way means giving up a stake in the system, which is rewarding you at the minute. And I understand that because I also know what it feels like to be blacklisted. I understand what that feels like. But so there's this argument around, the lack of moral courage to kind of say what needs to be said. However, when you look at around the world and you look at the parallels, from history in terms of how the authoritarian far right hard man rose into power, especially in Europe, the parallels are terrifying. What Trump is doing at the minute is fascism in America. People are just not calling it that. But if you look at it, any objective examination of it shows you, what is happening. ICE, honestly, are his equivalent of the brown shirts.
Yeah.
That Hitler used to roll out. And even saying it out loud sounds, that sounds a bit dramatic. Oh, but why are we invoking the name of Hitler when it's 2025 and he was democratically elected, etc., etc.? Doesn't matter about what I see. Just have a look at what he's doing. Have a look how he's destroying democratic institutions, centralizing power, putting cronies into positions of influence. It's not about ability. It's always about loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
And if you notice, that's a common trait that these sorts of fascists adopt and put into play. And if you look at it across Europe, we're having the rise of fascism. And there's similarities to what happened, in the 1930s when fascism rose, when it was deep inequality and it was a pushback against pluralism and increased liberalism. A certain section of society didn't like it. A really vocal, toxic, manipulative, clever, powerful minority didn't like it, and they played to base human fears the way that they do now. So whereas it was the Jewish community that were demonized so effectively and tragically and horrifically back then, it's now immigrants and it's now Muslims that are being demonized and terrorized and othered so effectively, so that these individuals can gain the levers of power and take hold of that whilst not really believing it themselves. Because once they get there, it's steeped in corruption, it's steeped in self-interest, and it's steeped in maintaining their positions there. You know, you spoke earlier, Tim, about, you know, how are we here again? But history has shown us we're just in this doom spiral. We constantly make the same mistakes again. After the tragedy of the last world wars, there was definitely a momentum to be collaborative, to work together to ensure these things didn't happen again, to learn the lessons, creation of wonderful things like the NHS in this country, you know, social movements, you know, the United Nations. We'll comment on the state of it now, but the idea of the collective and fighting against fascism, and because we understood the horrors of it then, we've forgotten all those lessons. We're stepping back into, you know, a really difficult, horrific possibility. And the thing that I'm struggling with is it feels like we're sleepwalking into it. When we used to watch those documentaries in our history lessons, and they were sepia tinted, and it was footage of fascism and all these marches and how certain communities were being demonized, we used to just wonder, why didn't people stand up? There was more of them than there was of them. And yet here we are in that situation, maybe in its infancy, but it's there. It's there. And I sound alarmist when I say it. I'd rather be speaking to you about something else, actually, today. But when we're discussing racism, when we're discussing the whole thing, you cannot separate it from the political reality that's actually, well, probably on our doorstep in the UK, but actually other countries are living and breathing at the minute.
Okay, guys, I need a very big favor from you. If you are watching on YouTube, please make sure you hit the subscribe button, because that makes a massive difference for our podcast. It literally costs you nothing other than a split-second click. But if you're also watching or listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, make sure that you give us a follow there. But in order for it to count, you also need to leave us a review. Please feel free to give us whatever review you think that it's fair, but it's important that you do, because otherwise they don't count your following. Why? I have no idea, but that's just how it is. But it costs you 3 seconds to do that. So I'll really, really appreciate it if you do that. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the episode. Yeah. And I think, and this is the reason why I want to have this conversation, because I do have so many friends and I sympathize with them when they say things like, I don't want to listen to the news anymore. It's depressing. Or you see on LinkedIn, especially, for example, on your post, I see a lot of people commenting that, oh, why are we talking about this on LinkedIn? You know, it's a professional network, etc. But I tell people that all of that impacts you, regardless of who you are. You know, if you're a business owner, I mean, of course, a lot of our listeners here are, you know, young professionals, entrepreneurs, etc. And I say repeatedly, part of your business planning right now must involve risk analysis. And I'm not talking about economic risk analysis. It has to be political now, even now, pandemic. I mean, as a biomedical scientist, I look at what's happening in America, for example, where now they want to cancel vaccines. I saw this report yesterday that apparently, I think probably in September, some experts are predicting that in September that they're going to be announcing that autism is caused by vaccines. This is one of the most debunked nonsense in medical history, and they tried to bring that nonsense back. So apparently, you know, I'm a victim of vaccines because I'm neurodivergent. But this is where they're going. So mark my words, they are opening up the floodgates for potential new pandemic somewhere, certainly in America. So that has to be part of your business plan, believe it or not. This is, I mean, and, you know, that goes back to the whole point of, you know, it's us versus them. It's gone beyond politics. It's not even politics anymore. And I'm wondering, you know, because you mentioned with fascism that how it's being taught at school. And I'm wondering, maybe that is the problem, because when people think of fascism, they automatically think of, Hitler, which is true, but they don't understand the core principles of it, the basics that, you don't have to go as extreme as Hitler or murder masses of Jews, for example. And again, I'm a victim of that. My entire Jewish family were murdered by the Nazis. So I understand that. But that's just extreme. Fascism can, happen in tiny, smaller stages, but they don't teach you this at school, do they?
No, I think there's definitely a civic illiteracy issue there. And I think that is an issue which, particularly in the UK, that we need to think about, because in the next election, and I was cheering when I heard this, 16-year-olds will for the first time get the vote.
Yes.
16-year-olds. I think it's brilliant.
Absolutely.
I couldn't believe people reading it. When I read the news, people criticizing it. They were criticizing it because they were afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. Kids know a lot more. Kids know, you've got kids, I've got kids. They know everything. They understand.
And I'll speak for my kids, and they call bullshit when they see bullshit. They understand very well why things are so broken, and they see some of the things and just don't understand why things are the way that they are. And I'm looking forward to some of those choices that they'll make at the next election. But where do our children get their knowledge from, like you've described? Well, if we're not teaching it at school, well, we know where they're going to get it from. Disinformation on social media, TikToks, influencers. That becomes your protocol. I think I read a stat that young people, 30% of young people derive their news from TikTok. Now, it's a really, really important channel, but we all know there are kind of challenges around social media. In my household, we talk about this stuff openly, as you'd expect. I've worked in systems change, so I've done work which has led to systems change, whether that's been in policing or different sectors. So I've been at those tables, Tim, where you've been making those decisions which matter. So I've also understood actually why things don't change and why somebody like me was able to affect the level of change that he was. Somebody unremarkable, somebody who probably shouldn't have been at the table, and yet I was still able to do the things that I did. And understanding some of that inertia, understanding some of those failures in leadership, for me were revelatory, actually, because it showed to me that some of the complexity that we have baked in as to why things don't change actually come down sometimes to something far more simple, which is having the moral courage to do the right thing. Now, that right thing will be difficult. And I'm not saying that's the easy thing. There's not like one silver bullet to reconcile everything. There's just never easy things. And that's part of the problem, because you've got to engage with complexity.
Yeah.
The consistent lack of moral courage I saw at the most senior levels in the different sectors that I've worked in, it just astonished me. It really, really astonished me. And also, the times that you did see it was like a beacon in the storm, because you've seen somebody following the path of what needed to be done. And in their leadership, what they created was followership.
Yeah.
And I think that is what is lacking at the minute so much. We want people who have convictions and who are actually advocating for things bigger than themselves. So it's not about self-interest. It's about leadership baked in the right principles, leading in the right way. But that thing I'm describing is moral courage. Because we just don't see it time and time again. The people in public life, it feels like it's performative. And then slowly when you peel the layers back, then you think, oh, there it is. There's the hypocrisy. There's a scandal. We're not perfect. I'm not saying anybody's perfect, but we're crying out for that sort of leadership in public life and public service that is just absent at the minute. And it is out there. there are people working in these sectors that do it unsung, out of the spotlight. What if they were brought in? What if they were brought in and given the opportunities to lead in some of these spaces? If they had the platforms, people who do this because it's the right thing, people who do it out of earshot, out of the media glare. The qualities that we celebrate in public life are all wrong.
Yeah.
They're all wrong. The oracy is really powerful, but where is oracy taught? Typically in public schools and private education. And it is a very, very seductive, skillful art that people use serpentine-like to sidetrack us and blind us. And I just crave that different type of quality, that different type of leadership baked in sincerity that I can follow behind. And I just don't see enough of it. I know it, I have it in my network.
Yeah.
If you think about those inspirational leaders in public life at the minute, they're scant. Scant there.
Well, they're hidden in the shadows. I mean, that's why I say that one of the key reasons why I want to build this podcast is that I want to bring these people out of the shadows, because they're basically being shadowed by, or rather, well, maybe shadow banned even, I would say, by the media, because they're not famous enough. They're not clickbaity enough. I mean, the thing that I talk a lot about, that I think 2010s would be remembered as the decade of clickbaits, because that was the period where people started to get frustrated with all the performative platitudes from companies and politicians, that all it took is for them to see, somebody as authentic, quote unquote, as Donald Trump or Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson in the UK, right? And they're like, oh, there you go. We've got an honest person who says it how it is, etc., etc. I mean, there's something in that. I mean, you're right. Absolutely. I think that was the point where people started to feel, we've had enough of experts. The infamous statement from Michael Gove that we should not be listening to experts anymore. And I think this is really a very serious problem, that people now, they've been craving for authenticity for such a long time that they were willing to go behind any jackass that looks authentic just because they're authentic. Whether they're being truthful or not, it seems to be irrelevant, which is a very big problem. So, I mean, because in your case, you saw it from the systemic point of view, and you mentioned earlier that some people perhaps they want to stick their necks out, etc., but they're scared to do it because of the pushback. Now, so from your experience, because I know you've had some serious pushback, if you don't mind sharing, what level of pushback did you receive? Because obviously, if somebody wants to do what you've done, and what I'm trying to do, I'm kind of new to this myself. I've kind of stuck my head out of the tech sector, and people are trying to punch me as well. But how do you deal with that? Because ultimately, it's like going through fire, right? It's like you try to kind of fight against all these different forces. So how did you manage to do it?
I mean, I can only speak to my life experience, Tim, and I grew up in a particular way. I grew
and you're Scottish. You've got that's an advantage already, isn't it?
I've got a natural fighting instinct because of my Celtic heritage. Because of my childhood, I grew up in an environment where it was really hard. I had a hard childhood. Amazing parents, but it was just mum and dad and my siblings, and we didn't have any extended family, nobody else. And my daily reality as a child was facing racism, not in a subtle way or where you were excluded, but people just calling me just the word. I'm going to use the P word, Paki.
Mm-hmm.
If you are South Asian, you will understand what the venom behind that word. My children will be lucky if they've ever heard that word maybe a handful of times in their lifetime. I heard it thousands of times. That word followed me around my childhood alongside violence and hatred. I grew up in that. I grew up in this really difficult environment. Not everybody was like that, but a significant amount of people were like that. So that environment was formative for me. It made me. And I called my book True North because this idea of True North is something that came to me through childhood and who I was, what was my true north, my values. So I describe it as 3 Fs: my faith, my family, and my fight. Faith, because I'm Muslim, and even when I was wee, that idea of faith and something bigger than me helped ground me, helped give me strength. Mum and dad were amazing. They provided that warm shelter in my childhood.
Yeah.
And fight, because I had to fight. Physically, not really, but my fight was just getting back up every day. Getting back up every day, being able to face what the next day brought. Sounds dramatic, but that's what my childhood was like. So having these qualities enabled me to do the things that I went on to do later in my career. And yeah, I have had senior roles. And when I was in policing and investigating policing, I had incredible pushback when I was director for London and I was investigating the Met Police. Actually, I expected the pushback externally from the Met Police. That was what it was. I knew that would happen. But the hardest pushback that I got was inside my own organisation.
Wow.
Because not only was I director for London, and you got to remember the timeline of it, I became director of London at 2019. George Floyd was murdered in 2020. We had the summer of the Black Lives Matter protests then. And this idea of police accountability and the relationship with Black communities was a global news story. And that was my job. That was actually my job in the UK. So what was already a difficult gig became an incredibly high profile gig. So I accepted the responsibility of that. And alongside that role, I also became the national discrimination lead. So I led our anti-racism work. And that meant having to do things. But what I discovered was that, the tokenistic description of we welcome diversity. Yeah, you welcome diversity to the table until that diversity demonstrates that diversity and diverse thinking and wanting to do different things in different ways, in ways that haven't been done before or in ways that don't necessarily fit the groupthink. And then everything became a fight. Every single piece of work that I led there, whether it was around stop and search in London or nationally, or whether it was around how to engage with communities, or whether it was what press statement to put out, what quote to put out, everything became some form of battleground. It was that contentious. And it was like that for the nearly 5 years that I occupied that role. But my life had prepared me for that.
Yeah.
I'd never known anything else but other than how to fight. I'd learned that physically, but I'd learned in the workplace what that looked like. And I didn't become a director by being an idiot. Mm-hmm. I understood what it took to navigate. I understood what it was like to take around people. But I didn't expect the avalanche of, I don't know what to describe. Hate is too strong. I think hate is too strong. But the avalanche of resistance that came against me, it came at me from underneath and it came at me from top. And it very nearly broke me. And I'm really hard and I'm really resilient. But it was a humbling experience what it was like to feel that pressure, to feel how individuals connived against you and came at you. And yet, despite all that, Tim, when I left that organization and I left that system, I didn't understand my worth. I didn't understand what I had done until people reached out, people who weren't in the organization. And then I understood actually properly my value and the work that I'd done. You don't do the work at the time and like take pride in it or kind of polish your nails and say, look what I've done. Or that you don't feel that pride. You don't understand the importance of it because you too much have your head down, just trying to do the right thing, trying to affect the form of change that you have. And it wasn't until I left and I realized that people actually, they knew who I was, they recognized the work, and the remarkable thing was that people thanked me for it. And it wasn't just members of the community. It was people inside police forces where they had been victims and who thanked me for that work. The people who didn't appreciate me or didn't want me and tried their best to break me were technically my own people. Now, I can't really rationalize that. And if I went too far down that line, that line just leads to bitterness. But I came back like a broken bone, calcified, strengthened. And those lessons that I learned driving change in that system are lessons that I've carried forward into different systems, and the lessons that I try and speak about and share now as well, because I'm just a bang average guy, Tim, right? Bang average guy who grew up in Scotland, who had his own experience. And yet if I was able to get to the table and tilt it just ever so slightly and affect the level of change that I could, what could other people do if they understood their own agency and understood the possibility that lies within them, if they just keep persisting and don't believe the massive gaslighting that goes on these systems and these organizations? Lots of difficult stories within that, but that's just the overall sense of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, going back to the diversity point, the criticism I tend to have is that it's just a box ticking exercise. That a lot of these, I tell people that a lot of these organizations never cared about diversity. It's just, it's a nice PR exercise, etc. Because as you said, once you start bringing somebody that is really pushing for real diversity in a way that you've highlighted, you start seeing pushback. And we've seen that in America, for example, how you've seen a lot of the tech, which is the sector that I know very well, the sector that always, I would say prides itself, but actually claim to be that they're much more liberal and they believe in openness and DEI, etc. Trump became president, they just dropped all of it just like that. And to me, if you care about these things, you would never drop it for anyone, right? And I think, as you were talking, sort of describing your journey there, it just shows to me that it's a combination of the leaders at the top, because obviously you were at the top, but you still had people above you. So you've got that sort of the top echelons, I suppose, right? That controlling the system. And sometimes I wonder, because people always, me included, I'm guilty of that. I say, it's the system is broken, the system is this or that. And I'm just wondering, is it really the system? Was it actually the people at the top? Because, for example, in theory, the American system should have stopped Trump a long time ago. But what was the problem that prevented the system from doing what the system should have done? It's the people. They either capitulated to him, or they just said, we don't want to get too political, so we shouldn't arrest him, even though he's a criminal or whatever. And I'm thinking, because you were part of the system, you tried to reshape the system. So is the system the problem, or is it the people of the system, or the people behind the system who are the problem?
You've answered your own question, Tim, and it's a point that I make. It's absolutely spot on. It's similar to when people speak about culture. It's the problem's the culture, but when we speak about the problem as the culture is just a manifestation of leadership behaviors and the behaviors you tolerate in an organization. When you're talking about the system and why a system is effective or not, invariably when you go to the top of the system, it's made up of people.
Yeah.
It's made up of invariably senior people, and that ends up to be normally just a handful of people. And those handfuls of people that permeate these systems, you tend to find the same people kick about the system an awful lot, that go from next senior gig to next senior gig to next senior gig. And even the boards, they are generally made up of very homogenous thinking, homogenous looking individuals. I'm not saying diversity is the answer for everything. We've seen the last government, and that showed you that's absolutely not the answer to everything. But it always comes back to individuals and the choices they're willing to make or not willing to make, and the level of risk they're willing to tolerate or not tolerate. That's why I will use the word moral courage a lot in this conversation, because there's a certain choice that is in front of everybody in leadership at certain points in senior leadership about the change they want to affect or they don't want to affect, and what they were willing to risk personally or socially or professionally around that. And I just seen systems baked in risk aversion. That's what it was called. You will hear this phrase a lot, particularly if you're in the public sector. Oh, risk aversion. It's socialized. It's accepted. Oh, it's very, very risk averse. No, that's not something we really do here. And it's kind of, that's given a degree of acceptance. But if you actually break it down, what is that saying? That almost speaks to a level of institutionalized cowardice.
Yeah.
Whatever level of change you want to affect is going to be difficult. But some of these wicked problems that we are facing, if you look at historically some of the interventions that were made, they were really bold and they were really difficult and they came with a level of risk. But now we seem to be afraid of being shouted down by the right-wing press, for wanting to do anything different or radical to address the really deep-seated problems that afflict too many of us. So that's why I saw consistently. Your point is absolutely spot on. It always comes back to individuals or the choices they're willing or not willing to make. And there's too much thought around self-preservation rather than, well, what am I going to do? I would never speak in a binary term, so I can never apply that to absolutely everybody.
Yeah.
But when I speak to my experience, I saw that time and time and time again.
And what would be the solution to that? I mean, obviously, the obvious solution is to get rid of them, but how would you get rid of them? Or can you get rid of them?
I think it's really difficult, isn't it? It's really difficult because, I could sit here and say we have some sort of metaphorical bonfire where we just get rid of all these leaders and transport in a new sort of leadership. But really, it goes back to more fundamental questions of the type of leadership we recognize, we celebrate, and we promote. Most people don't recognize good leadership. This phrase about exceptional leadership, there's two ways of seeing it as really, really great leadership, or actually the other way of seeing it, which is the fact that it's actually exceptional, that you will very, very rarely see it. Because that quality of leadership, you'll probably count on your hand the amount of times you will see it in your professional working life. Very, very rarely will you come across it. But the whole system and the whole recruitment process and everything that is geared up towards it is not designed to celebrate or reward or encourage or promote the type of leadership that you want, which embodies the level of professional courage. You want to make the right sort of decisions and choices and lead in the right way. Because this is not just about an activist mindset. This is about having the right sort of leadership, which can make things better. Make things better. Who wants to fight against that? And yet we reward people who play it safe, who are risk averse, who are anodyne, who will say things and describe things in the way things have always been said and described. And do we wonder why we have the same sort of outcome consistently if we're giving the same sort of input consistently? If we're not willing to change what we recognize as leadership, then when we have these institutions and these systems governed by these individuals, why are we expecting anything different apart from those radical pinpricks of hope that you get, which are generally driven by single points of failure, individuals who are fighting against that sort of narrative, but that's not sustainable.
And we actually see that with the UK government right now, because people thought that, they would have such a strong majority in parliament, it is more left-leaning, and they would basically bring the sort of change that people wanted. But they're literally doing exactly what you've highlighted. It's that they're just so risk-averse. And I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, you've got that level of power right now. I mean, they are so powerful. I mean, not that I agree with that level of power. I don't think any single party should have that level of power, but it is what it is at the moment. But you would think at least, they coined themselves as the good guys. But they have so much power to literally go and tell the media to go and fuck themselves. I mean, what are they afraid of? But as you said, for some reason, they are just so risk averse. Oh, we don't want to talk about Brexit, even though it's the big elephant in the room that is destroying our economy and our country and our standing in the world. But no, we don't want to talk about it. Why not? Who are you scared of? Who are they scared of? I mean, they're literally at the top. I mean, the only person, in theory, of course, legally, that's not possible. But literally the only person that could stop them is the king. but I'm wondering, is it maybe because they come? I mean, Keir Starmer actually, effectively, he was the a very successful prosecutor, but effectively he was part of the same system that you are part of. And I mean, is that what you mean in terms of that he? I don't know. Some people like him, they naturally are so risk averse that they think, you know what, I better not piss people off. Somebody might get upset. I need to kind of please as many people as I possibly can. Rather than just, literally, well, going back to authenticity, being authentic as a leader, it's about, again, not saying the radical crazy stuff, but literally say, look, this is good for my country. You might disagree with it, but I am prioritizing my country. I'm prioritizing everyone. I don't know. I mean, is that a simplistic way for me of looking at this? I mean, because to me, I think it's an example that is just playing itself out right in front of our eyes at that government level.
I think it's a good example. I wouldn't like to be prime minister, though. It's a really difficult. It's a really difficult job. But I think having had senior roles, you understand you are faced with complexity. So you will not be able to do everything or say everything that will please everybody. But sometimes you do have to pick a line. You do have to draw a line in the sand and understand where your line in the sand is and where you're willing to go and what you're willing to say and what you're willing to represent. We talked about fascism and the far right before, and I think one of the things we're seeing play out nationally in the UK at the minute is our politics is being dragged to the right. It's the same thing that happened with UKIP and this debate about leaving the European Union. You have really toxic, pungent minority that constantly banged on about this, which was artificially amplified by the media, and it dragged the debate in a false direction. And we see the consequences of that. We're seeing the same thing happen now with all this hateful rhetoric about immigrants, about asylum seekers, about Muslims. And what's happening is that the debate is being pulled into the direction of the far right. So things which would have been unacceptable or unpalatable just a few years ago are become mainstreamed because they are having such a powerful effect. And every part of my being, every part of my DNA would just wish that we would hold the line and say, no, that's what you want to talk about. You crack on. We are going to focus on this. So when you sometimes, I come back to the workplace, but we always have this toxic individual in the workplace. It's how you deal with them. They tend to be quite articulate. They tend to carry themselves in a certain way. They're quite formidable. But it's how do we deal with them? Do you pander to them? Do you give in to every demand? Do you give them the airtime? Or do you stand in what you believe in? And do you actually take them on and come back at them with powerful evidence and counter narratives baked in what you believe in? And what we're seeing at the minute, Tim, in the UK, is everything being pulled there. And yet, I'll come back to this phrase again and again. Most people are good. If I believe most people are racist, are hateful, I wouldn't be able to step out the front door. I couldn't live in this country that I call home because, and I'll come to the flag stuff maybe later on, but we are allowing ourselves to be pulled in this direction. And what we have is a silent, decent majority that has nowhere for its voice to be heard. We're hearing all the crap. We're hearing all the hate. We're hearing from Nazis.
Yeah.
Nazis are being platformed at the minute. Nazis, actual Nazis. Whereas the decent silent majority, people like me, feel politically homeless. Where is our voice being represented as part of this debate, where we understand that we have more in common than not, and the things that separate us are actually vanishingly few when you actually sit down and break bread with each other? That space for nuance, that space for, careful debate instead of the angry, binary, shouty rhetoric promoted by the algorithms of social media, which these people profit from. Yeah. These people profit from it in a monetary sense, not just from a power dynamic. People who put this stuff out, whether it's in the media, print media, whether it's in television, whether it's in social media, they make money from hate. And that's a hidden dynamic about it as well. So I think somewhere 10 minutes ago, you asked me a question about the minister. And I would say one of the things that I think we're struggling with is allowing the fascists to pull the debate in an artificial direction when we need to be focusing on the real issues. We have more food banks in this country than we have McDonald's.
Yeah.
How about we try that?
And that's the thing. That's what I'm so frustrated. I think I speak for many, many people. Whether you support Labour or you don't support Labour, I think it's irrelevant now. Again, going back to the point that, it's us versus the far right. And, I think people truly did have hope. I certainly did have hope that I thought, okay, we had that conservative trash for the past 14 years. And I say conservative trash, not as an anti-conservative individual, as it were. But if you look at the so-called traditional conservatives like John Major, he was against the conservative government that we had for the past 14 years. That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's a completely different thing now. But that government that we had has destroyed our society. And I speak as somebody who actually was involved to some extent in social entrepreneurship, where we use martial arts to get kids off the streets. And the austerity under David Cameron basically destroyed all of the funding that we had. I knew many centers that shut down as a result of that. And, the same people that basically prevented organizations like mine and many others to get kids off the streets so they don't commit crime, they're the ones that are complaining that, oh, now we have so many kids on the streets committing crime. I was like, yeah, you sons of bitches caused this, right? And I'm like, again, I'm vocal. You know what I'm like? I kind of reached the point, and I even said this on this podcast, that I feel that what Michelle Obama said a while back, I can't remember how many years ago, that, if they go low, we go high. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm sorry, I don't think that's going to work anymore. We tried that in 2010s. They went low, everybody went high. They were trying to explain themselves with facts or whatever. But then, look what happened. No one cared. No one listened. And perhaps we need to do what Gavin Newsom is doing in America. Again, he's not particularly that, I don't know. I don't follow American politics that much, but I've been hearing that he's been trolling the MAGA movement, that he literally does what they're doing, and they're losing their minds. And I'm like, why are you losing? He's literally just holding up a mirror. He's doing what you guys are doing. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's kind of ridiculous. It's sad, but that's the world that we live in today. If we are to change, then we need to basically be aware of what's going on around us and play the game. It has to be in the game. Using the sports analogy I like to use in whatever sports. Like I used to play basketball professionally for a short period of time. There were games where, the other players of the other team, they were playing dirty. And the referees, for some reason, didn't pull the whistle or whatever. So I would be like, fine, I'll play dirty. I had situations, I'm not proud of that, but I had situations where 2 players ended up in hospital because of what I did to them, and, but that's the world that we live in. And I think how should we fight this now? I wonder, from your point of view, because even like, for example, we're seeing in America, the police, they're not doing their job properly because of ICE, I guess. And I'm just, again, you've answered that question, because I wanted to ask you, it's like, why aren't the senior people in the police in the UK, for example, standing up and saying, you know what, we can't support what the government is doing in allowing the Faragist types to roam the streets because they're scared of freedom of speech or whatever. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing the opposite. And I'm thinking, well, even if the police are not willing to fight, so what do we do as a society?
I mean, there's a lot in that. I think because I know policing, senior police leaders aren't able to speak about political matters. They can't. They'll lose their jobs. So they're not able to come out.
Sorry, but isn't that wrong? In your opinion, should they be able to?
Yeah, look, that's a different question. But if they actually came out and said these things, they would lose their job. They would lose their job. So they're not able to do that. But I have seen instances of police leaders coming out and being really brave and saying, no, we're not going to do this. So I have seen some of them draw the line, and it's mixed. Some, you see their intentions, others, you see their bravery. But when you talk about the system, they're constrained by this system, Tim. So I'm going to be really fair to senior police leaders about what they can and can't do in this country. This broader point around the rules of the game, you used martial arts as an example, and I'll just build on that. It's like two people have been invited to a boxing match. So, one's prepared, one's going by the rules and he's boxing. The other person is doing MMA. So he's using knees, he's using shins, he's using kicks, and the other person keeps boxing and he's at a disadvantage. So that adage you had about Michelle Obama, I don't see how that works anymore.
Yeah.
I don't see how it works. And
it's sad. It's sad because I don't disagree with her. I think she's right, but that's just not the world that we live in.
But that doesn't mean we have to give up our moral decency.
Yeah.
Or our values. It just means you have to use a different tactic. For instance, I watch consistently here as certain right-wing politicians use certain devices in debating to talk over and steamroll their interviewers or pulverize their opponents through straw man arguments, for instance, or various different tactics. And I get really frustrated because people are just crying out for somebody to speak like a human being and call them out for it.
Yeah.
The way we want our leaders to speak, you spoke about this authenticity, and I think what the far right have done really successfully is monopolize their version of authenticity because people are fed up with the system and they want to break it. So they're willing to go in a different direction. Oh, they seem a bit different. They seem real. We're going to vote for them.
Yeah.
Men that advertise gold bullion, men that sit in golden toilets, men who have nothing in common with us. But people are willing to do that because they monopolize that. Where is the alternative for us? Where is the people who are done normal jobs, normal careers, that can speak like human beings, but can also take these people on, in debates and go toe-to-toe when people are lying in your face? Because people like that, as you rightly called out, will not play by the rule book.
Yeah.
Their feelings do not care about your facts. They don't care. They will shout you down. They will make false arguments. They will lie about you. They will move you on. They will shout you down. They're bullies. That's what they are. They employ bullying tactics to win their argument. And we know with bullies, if you turn the other cheek, they're just going to come back.
Carry on. Yeah.
So you're right. But it's how you fight. How do you resist? How do you come up against these individuals? And in the public space, we're lacking. What we're lacking at the minute, I think that's why there's so much frustration at the minute, because we are not seeing it, and we're going and we celebrate it, and when we see that kind of leadership, or where we see these debates elsewhere, because they're lacking in our public life. I wish I had an answer. I wish I had an easy answer. And I know there's a growing movement in the UK for a new political party.
Yeah.
There, so many people feel its absence. But I think what politics looks like now, today, it needs to change. People just easily grab onto this thing, oh, we need to be on TikTok. As if that's the answer to anything. If you're on TikTok, how are you going to speak to young people, how are you going to communicate? Are you going to communicate like a human being? Or are you going to communicate in the media training that's been instilled in you to land your point and to come back to the arc and to use your finger like this to emphasize each single point and the things that irritate you so much about every single politician? Or do you want to hear people speak in a really human way about the real things and expose your imperfection? Because I've been in front of the media, and I had to unlearn all the media training I was given and try and speak in a more human way while still representing difficult issues. I was never a politician, but I had a difficult public-facing role. And I know that I would really warm to individuals who are willing to go on there and represent things authentically. If they're a bit rough around the edges, I think that's something probably people would warm to, rather than clipped vowels, perfect sound bites, perfect statistics all the time. If you've seen that their intention was good, you understood the background, it would give you so much grace, I think, in how you counter some of this. And we need more of those sorts of people in public life, Tim.
Yeah.
Somebody like me was able to be a public servant for the length of time that I was, and to be able to still do the sort of things that I did. We need to try and bring more people. I'm not going to say people like me, don't want more of me, but people who understand values-based leadership, people who want to make change for the better, whatever that better is, into public life. Because if we don't get this throughput of leadership into these systems and grow the right sort of leadership, we're just giving up that ground to what's always been there. And we need to encourage that through the right sort of education in school, to the pathways in local politics, to senior politics. And there's organizations out there that do that, like Operation Black Vote, for instance, in the UK. They've encouraged diverse leadership, and they've grown some really excellent political leaders from that who went on to have these leadership positions. But we need more of that. And it comes back to your point you made around education. If we're not inspiring our young people that this is potentially a pathway to change, what's the other option? Hopelessness, frustration, bitterness. Where does that lead us? Just down a cul-de-sac.
Yeah. Well, this actually reminds me of a point. One of my guests, my friend, Professor Jeremy Leavesley, who's a mathematician, an educator, and he was saying the problem he has with the education system is that it teaches kids to be the grinders. Basically, they're very, very good at taking orders, right? Being told what to do. And, but the world needs finders, right? People who are willing to basically, stick the two fingers up at the system and say, you know what? No, I want to find out how things work. And if there's a problem, well, I want to find out a solution to that problem. So that's effectively, it's not just entrepreneurship. I mean, for me, that's what innovation is. And innovation comes, like what you're doing is innovation, actually, in terms of leadership, how you should be, what modern leadership looks like. It's not the way it used to be. Well, it's used to be now for the past how many hundreds of years, like seems to be people following the same rules. So no, absolutely 100%. And I think this is why, again, going back to the current Labour government, because if you look at their leadership, all of them come from very ordinary backgrounds. They're not privately educated. Most of them, I believe, they all come from humble backgrounds. So, so the very people that decide to go to the far right because they think the far right represent them more, which is kind of bizarre. Like Farage is a freaking millionaire, yet he understands the working class. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And I think this is definitely a failure of communication. I mean, because how could a working class person feel more related to somebody like Farage rather than somebody like, say, Angela Rayner, right? Or somebody like Keir Starmer, which is like, so communication and, of course, leadership. And I think that's part of the frustration. But because as you were describing that, so I had a thought in my head that kind of made me realize, I'm not sure if anybody asked that kind of question before or said it before. At some point, surely we need to start blaming the people as well. Because we can blame the leadership, the PR, etc. But why do people listen to Farage? So, for instance, when he and his party, they go down the racist route, and it is racist. Yeah, let's call it for what it is. And instead of people saying things like, "No, that's wrong," I mean, what are you talking about? That's racism. But no, people get riled up, and they're like, you know what? Yeah, I don't want those brown Muslims in my neighborhood. Even though they probably lived with these people for decades. But suddenly, because Farage said something, yeah, I want to follow what he says. And actually, this reminds me, I mentioned Emma Monk earlier. She actually told me a story of a friend of her friend who lives in leafy suburbs of Surrey. So very, very, for the non-UK people, it's a very posh area in the UK, like very well, I wouldn't call it the Beverly Hills, but it's, high up there.
It's nice.
Yeah. Very nice, actually. But basically, they decided, so the people that live there, that they want to protest against one of the hotels that had asylum seekers or something. But I'm not sure if it was actually a hotel. I can't remember if she said it was a hotel or an actual center for asylum. But it was for asylum families. So they had children there. But they went there to protest, and they were throwing rotten meat into the playground. It was children's playground. So we're not talking about open field that somehow they didn't know that children were there. No, it was children's playground. You could see the slides. You could see all the kiddie stuff. It's designed for children of refugees. They were throwing rotten meat into that. And these are highly educated people living in the suburbs. So again, because I hate it when I see the media going, oh, there's all this poor working class. It's not the working class. Like with Brexit, it wasn't the working class actually that voted predominantly for Brexit, actually. Yeah. So just as an FYI, and I think this is another disgusting thing that the media does a lot. No, this is people from Surrey. Posh, educated, with money, apparently clever, right? I presume that some of them are doctors or whatever the hell they are. Yet they listen to the Farages of this world. They decided to come together, go through the effort of getting rotten meat from somewhere and walk all the way to the center and throw rotten meat to the playground where there are children. Now I'm thinking to myself, okay, you can blame Farage all we like, but these people, they can't get away with this. I can't not blame them. Because, I'm sorry, what, don't you have a brain? So what's your opinion on that? Because I feel sometimes we're not blaming the people enough. And I'm wondering, shouldn't we also do that at some point?
You won't hear me excuse them. I think what you're seeing here is just the conditions being created for people who are racist to be racist. Racism is something that's always been here, but it's never addressed properly. It has never been addressed sufficiently.
Not even in schools. Not even in schools.
And racism is rife now in schools because racism now has become fashionable again, has become acceptable again to a certain extent. It has. I'm seeing racism now, which I haven't seen since childhood.
Well, I don't know, he said.
Media and real life. It is. But you're talking about this point of accountability. So not everybody that is being seduced by the arguments of the far right is racist, but a certain percentage of them are. A certain percentage of them are, and racism isn't the preserve of any particular social class, as some people would like to point out, like you said. It belongs in every strata. Every strata. So people in Surrey protesting that we don't want these people on our doorsteps. Well, there's probably a reason that they retreated to white leafy Surrey, because there isn't that many people like that live white leafy Surrey. So that comes in it. So there's absolutely a point of accountability here around racists being racist and exhibiting that. And there's still laws in this country around hate crime. So it is not a free-for-all. There are still laws around hate crime. And we've seen some of that stuff where we've seen racists painting the St. George's Cross on property. Then there was viral footage around that, and they shouted Islamophobic abuse at a Muslim woman as she was walking past. One of them has been arrested now because the police found them. And you cannot just spat out that sort of hatred without consequence. So there is legal consequence and accountability, but what we're finding now is the conditions and the environment that's been created now is allowing racists to feel comfortable enough to express themselves like this, to indulge in this sort of hatred, because there's always going to be a certain percentage of people who are racist, always going to be like that. But now they're feeling more emboldened to actually come out and act like this and indulge in their hatred. It's always been this way. When I worked in the systems that I've worked in, particularly in policing, racism was never treated the way that it should have been. Other issues were given different levels of attention. Policing has always struggled with racism in its denial and what needs to be done and with how it needs to be tackled. And then I thought, well, maybe it's just policing. But when I worked in different areas, it's a commonality. And I've had some senior discussions with senior individuals that I can't really talk about here.
Sure.
And it was very interesting, the difference that was given to other issues when I brought I said, well, you need to think about racism here when you're thinking about this issue or when you're thinking to tackle this. No.
It's like there's a bit of eye rolling, because I even see that on TV sometimes. When somebody mentions racism, they start rolling their eyes. It's like, oh, not that again, kind of thing.
Yeah, but it was more polite than that.
Yeah,
it was more polite. It was a blunt sidelining, and I think that this is what you learn as well when these issues are sidelined. It's never really overt in a way that you could feel aggrieved about, but it's done very subtly. But when you're around it enough, you understand it. Racism has never been tackled in the way that it needs to. We've seen a strengthening in the UK of the legislative response over the years. And now what we have is a movement to roll back the protections that we actually have.
Yeah.
When they talk about removing the European Convention of Human Rights, people don't really understand what that means. They just think it will remove these illegal immigrants. And by the way, that's not a legitimate term. It's asylum seekers.
There's no such a thing, exactly. Yeah.
Illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
These people are in this country seeking asylum, which is a legal process, which is permitted. Whatever you think about that, this term illegal immigrants is another lie that has been socialized by far right.
And the politicians, sorry to interrupt, but the politicians use it. Even Labour politicians now, they're talking about illegal immigrants. And we're like, well, what are you talking about?
Exactly.
Why can't they just shut this up and say, no, there's no such a thing as illegal immigrants? I mean,
This was my point earlier on, Tim, about how our politics is getting dragged to the far right by examples like that, things which creep into political language, which would never have been said before.
Yeah.
But because it's been used all the time by them, by right-wing media, by certain influential commentators, then you adopt the same language, because to maintain your own position is harder, because then you will stand out. Well, why are you still seeing asylum seekers? It's this. Well, then you have to explain your position. Yeah. You know, when you really drill down into it, it comes down to the choices that you make and you're willing to kind of stand up and speak to and be consistent on. You really have to have this consistent throughput about, well, why you're there, your values, the issues you're speaking to, because it's very easy to give into the pressure. I've been in that environment where you've had the pressure around you and you could give in and nobody would know. Your life would be easier. But by giving in, you chip away at yourself. You lose elements of yourself. And then history is a harsh judge, yes, but it's an honest judge. And when you have distance and time removed, and then people look back at actually what you did, what you said, how you conducted yourself, that will be the real test. But people don't see it because they get lost. They get lost in the moment. So that example you said, was absolutely right. And I've forgotten the original point I was making. But I'll just stop there.
No, well, it's about the police in terms of well, the racism that we see in people. Sort of, I don't want to even call it natural or whatever it is.
We're talking about accountability. So
accountability, yeah.
So we're seeing those examples where people are breaking the law and it is getting enforced, but the majority of racism is designed so that it fits underneath the legal threshold. So things like the Operation Raise the Flags that has frankly been so successful in the UK. That was Hope Not Hate published a report or an article a few days ago. Hope Not Hate are an excellent organisation that exposes and fights fascism, fights Nazis, let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
And they expose that this online campaign is led by 3 prominent individuals who are fascists. So this was not, a groundswell movement of people who well-meaning, who wanted to show pride in their country. If fascists have set this thing up, what are the motivations for it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are the motivations for it? The motivations are to try and divide us over a flag that is all of ours, but that has been really misappropriated and frankly stolen by racists and Nazis. Let me be clear. I don't give a shit if somebody flies the Union Jack on the flagpole down the road or as a St. George's Cross hanging out their window. I don't care. Good luck to them. Good luck to them, because that's as much my flag as it is theirs. So that doesn't intimidate me. That isn't going to make me say, you need to take that down. I understand what their tactic is. It's meant to intimidate. The Nazis used it really, really effectively around flag raising, and it's very, very well documented how powerful it is, and the intention behind it is to create division. For me, there's no division. This is
our flag.
Exactly. So I will never say, anybody raising it is a racist. They're not.
Yeah, but some people do. Some people do say that, which is ridiculous as well. So
exactly. So you can never say that, because that is giving into their really ill-baked, simple culture wedge issue that they're trying to drive. However, when you see those marches, you see the Union Jack being waved, outside these asylum seeker hotels, or when you're seeing these racist marches, it's a Union Jack and a St. George's Cross. So these fascists misappropriate our national flag. And because of that misappropriation, it does leave complex and mixed feelings in people like me and other people. I can't speak for anybody else, but I know through the conversations I've had that some people get scared by the flag because of that misappropriation. We are allowing people to define patriotism and what that means through these Nazis. And actually, is patriotism waving a fucking flag?
Mm-hmm.
I think patriotism is a bit more than that. It's about what you do for your community. It's about how you show up. It's about any acts of generosity and what British values actually mean, and sharing and supporting and doing the right thing. It's not about waving a flag or sticking a flag up or painting a flag on a fucking roundabout. This whole movement about saving our roundabouts, it's actually criminal damage.
Yeah.
Good luck to anybody that's videoed themselves committing criminal damage, because you'll probably get a knock at the door from the police. I think what we have allowed for too long is a misappropriation of a shared symbol. That symbol is tried to be used in a way that stokes fear in the hearts of people like me. But I'll tell you right now, Tim, it doesn't do that to me. It doesn't do that to me. I see what they're trying to do. It's been very successful, but actually I would question its success outside of just the flags be going up in terms of numbers. Because when I see the flag, you don't invoke any fear in me. You don't invoke any dread in me. And I'm not going into that line where everybody sticking up that flag is racist. No, I know who the racists are. We all know they are. Just look at the marches.
Yeah. And one thing people need to also understand, because I call people like Farage and the far right as treasonous, because what they're doing is actually destroying our country. I think that Brexit is a treasonous act. Because how could you say that, we're going to do all these things for our country and the country loses out, yet the beneficiaries are, I don't know, people like the Russian oligarchs, for example, right? There's a reason, like, again, for people who don't live in the UK, there's a common joke that we have about London being Londongrad, right? The city for the Russian oligarchs. And people like Farage, actually, they support people like that. They're Putin apologists, for example. So, so for me, how could you call yourself a patriot when you're literally everything that you're doing is harming British people? Not just the immigrants, but actual British people. Everybody in the UK is harmed by the policies of Farage. Like, for example, that dumbass speech he gave, a couple of days ago from the time of the recording of this, where he was going on about, I want to deport. I think he U-turned after that, just to be fair. But he was going on about that they want to send off every single immigrant out of the UK, kind of like what the Trump administration is trying to do. And when he was asked, well, yeah, but a lot of these people are Afghans, right? Including women. Are you going to send them back to the Taliban? Are you going to send women back to the Taliban? And he was like, we're not going to do it for 5 years. I'm like, yeah, but you're still going to send them back with the Taliban. But not only that, you have to have a deal with the Taliban. And you have to actually pay them money because they're not going to do it for free. So, but at the same time, he does not want to have any deals with the EU. So we are basically having this douchebag who says that he wants to cut our ties with our allies, get us out of the Human Rights Convention, which, by the way, is everyone's human rights. It's not just the immigrants. It's like your human rights as well. But at the same time, we strike a deal with a terrorist group. Are you call that patriotism? I mean, it's like brain, people. Use your brain. Seriously.
I read a good phrase how to describe these people because there's a commonality. They're all multimillionaires.
Yes.
And what they do is they cosplay being working class. They cosplay at it. They claim they represent the interests of the working class when they've made their careers off the back of breaking the working class through the work that they've done. They have no sympathy. They have no empathy for the working.
They don't care. Yeah.
They don't. They are funded by multimillionaires and their agenda is very, very different. And these are just, what they are very, very expert at doing though is taking legitimate grievance and pain and misdiagnosing the cause of that, and then amplifying the lie as the solution. And because the level of inequality and pain in this country is so acute at the moment, there's a lot of good people that are believing that lie alongside, let's be honest, the racists.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do, and they do it very, very successfully through some of the techniques that we've already spoken about. And one of the things that makes me laugh, though, is there's this campaign that the far right are kind of indulging in, which is demonizing asylum seekers, that they're here to steal our women and harm our women. This is a trope that has been used by the Nazis against Jewish people, by white supremacists, the Klan against black people in America. It is a trope that has been used successfully time and time again because it plays to those base human fears that they're here to harm in our women. That sounds misogynistic. I'm just paraphrasing what.
Yeah. Well, they did say that they want to protect their, like, was it Richard Tice, the reform types, but also the MAGA men. The MAGA men would say, our job is to protect our women.
Yeah, which is extremely misogynistic.
Yes.
Yeah, really problematic statement. However, if you look at the rioters last year, people those riots that were stoked by the far right and people, including Farage, there was a statistic that came out which said that 40% of the convicted rioters had a history of domestic abuse. Men convicted of being violent against women. 40%. Now, I'd like to see some analysis for some of these people going out on these marches, protesting outside these asylum seeker hotels, saying that they're there to protect women's safety. 200 organizations representing women's safety, charities, remarkable organizations, put out a collective statement last week, which said, not in our name, you are not doing this work in our name, because the evidence shows that the majority of violence perpetrated against women is by men that they know. It's not strangers. And actually, if we break it down by ethnicity, it's white men.
Yeah. Yeah. And even there's all the statistics in terms of child abuse, child pornography, that sort of stuff. It's mostly propagated by white men.
Yeah,
and the conversation that we have here in the UK about the grooming gangs, it's all Pakistani grooming gangs, but I didn't hear much about the non-Pakistani grooming gangs. There are quite a lot of them, right? Like the one in Liverpool recently, that it was a white gang, and I'm like, I didn't see anything in the news about that. I'm like, where's the BBC, for instance? I mean,
yeah, it's never publicized, and as I said, look, I've described my ethnicity at the minute. And even when I'm on LinkedIn, people throw this trope about Pakistani raping grooming gangs at me on a professional platform at LinkedIn. I've had people say that to me.
I've seen that in comments, actually. I'm sure I've seen that in some of the comments. Like, so it's public. They're putting their name out there.
And look, I'll challenge them back. I'll troll them.
Yeah.
I'm no victim. But that has become like a socialized, normalized thing, but the evidence shows you otherwise. You have horror shows of humanity in every faith, in every creed, but because they keep perpetrating this stereotype, it sticks. And in some people's head, this fallacy is actually a fact. Mm-hmm. And it's people like me who have to suffer that.
Yeah.
And when we say suffer, you have to think it's not just suffer in terms of some troll baiting you on social media. Some of these attacks mean real life consequences. Hate crime, for instance, against minorities has went up. Hate crime against Muslims has went up exponentially. Yeah. Last week, there was a pig's head, I think, left outside a mosque in Oxford. Things like that don't make the headlines. The other week, a young man from Scotland received a 10-year sentence for wanting to carry out an Andreas Breivik type attack on a mosque in Scotland. And he had planned to live stream it. He had taken his ammunition. He had taken whatever kit he wanted. And his plan was to kill all the worshippers in the mosque. And that congregation held around 200 people. The police, who we've criticised somewhat in this conversation, it's right to celebrate what they did because they spotted this. There was a counter-terrorist operation in place, and they arrested him literally on his way to the mosque. And yet that story, you wouldn't know about that story.
I didn't hear at all about that at all.
Exactly. Wow. And this is my point. So when we're talking about consequences as a result of this hate, I'm saying this today, this is going to end in tragedy. I don't want it to end in tragedy, but it's going to end in some form of tragedy. And the people who have stoked the fire, who have handed the people the matches, who have not lit the fire themselves, they will walk away and they'll probably join in the condemnation of this isolated incident. Won't call it terrorism for what it is, but I'm telling you, there is going to be a tragedy in this country as a result of this. This time last year, we had riots in the UK, riots stoked and based on a lie, that the fact that the individual was a Muslim who had committed those 3 horrific murders in Southport. And we've seen those riots spread across the UK, and people like me were afraid for our families. And that was last year. And the thing, Tim, I thought, this is probably as bad as it's going to get. It's got worse. It's got worse than last year in terms of the pressure, the rhetoric, the media, and it will end in people getting hurt and potentially loss of life. And I say that without any form of dramatization or alarmist rhetoric. I'm not doing that. Just look at the evidence, look at the hate crime, look what is happening. Hateful rhetoric always has consequences. And when you're successfully demonizing certain groups of people, certain people will act on that, and it will not end in a good place. That's why when I said to you at the start of this conversation, this is the worst that it's ever been, in my living memory, this is the worst it's ever been.
Well, going back to the point as well that you made, that this is fascism, like through and through. That's how it starts, and it always ends up with tragedy. With Hitler, it was the Jews. This time, it would be mostly Muslim, it seems, certainly in the UK. But we see that in Trump America. I mean, they're going after every person who's not white. It seems like it's not just the Latinos; it's everybody. That's where we're heading. And you're right. And the one thing I should highlight as well, kind of as a reminder, because in case somebody didn't see the episode that I had with Pat De Bruin, who's the head of Amnesty International's Big Tech Accountability, because the main reason I'm mentioning him, because you highlighted about how some of the narrative it's spread all over social media, and I do see a lot of people, even on LinkedIn, who say, "Oh, look, so many people talk about it in social media, on Twitter or whatever, because there's a lot of people who care." Well, actually, this is algorithmic boost of all of that bullshit. And again, we found as well, a lot of research have found that the vast majority of a lot of the accounts that you see on Twitter today are bots.
Yeah.
And there was about, I think it was like a 60% increase of MAGA supporting bots since November 2024. And it's on the rise. So whatever these legitimate concerns that people see on Twitter, most likely they're bots. But Twitter itself, I mean, obviously with Elon Musk's leadership, they're boosting it because it's clickbait. Going back to the clickbait point. And I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I'm not accusing LinkedIn of anything, but I've started to see some interesting things on LinkedIn recently where every time, I post about the issues that we talked about, I post about anything to do with, women's inequality, or somebody's attacking women, etc. I don't get any views. My following is growing, but I get some posts that get hundreds of thousands of views. But when these particular posts, I get like 200, 1,000 views or something like that. So I'm thinking, okay, so something, that's an algorithmic problem here. And I'm sure TikTok is different because TikTok belongs to China. With TikTok, if you say anything against China, that's the same thing going to happen there. And I think the reason why young people actually like TikTok, because they allow a lot of the stuff that you would not see on Twitter, for example, or you would not see on LinkedIn that is anti-fascism, anti-racism, etc. It goes quite viral on TikTok. It's interesting. So it's kind of like, this is basically all algorithmic manipulation. So when people say things like, "Oh no, we see a lot of people talk about it," firstly, most likely it's not people, and secondly, you think that way because the algorithms want you to think that way, because that's what keeps you on the platform. It's all about the cash, people. Follow the money. Follow the money.
That's a great point. I've got to the view that we should just ignore Twitter.
Yeah. Just walk away. I walked away a long time ago. I forgot. I left it. So, yeah.
It is not the view of the British public.
Mm.
It's used as the barometer for public sentiment. But because it's so polluted in the way that you described, Tim, how can it be used as a barometer for public sentiment?
Yeah, politicians still use it as a barometer for public sentiment for some reason.
And this is one of the major issues, that it's being used in that way, that politicians still engage on it in that way, and it's being used as that sort of vehicle and platform. When is it not? It's polluted, it's manipulated, it's artificial, and it's not representative. And it's, at the end of the day, it's massively corrosive and manipulative in terms of what it's saying, what it isn't, and for all the reasons that you described, what gets boosted, what doesn't. It's not a true reflection of reality.
Yeah.
And yet we continually seem to use it as a weather vane for what is public opinion and not. And then obviously you got the whole media thing on top of it. We need to find a way to step away from this. You know, because at the minute, what is that doing? It drives the debate then.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very effective in driving that debate, and for all the reasons that we've already discussed, that debate is driven by certain interests. I just imagine a world where we stopped actually using it and engaging with it and just left it to the side and found a different way, the way that we used to do it in terms of gauging, engaging public sentiment outside of that. You know, because something has went viral on Twitter, does that mean we need to respond to it necessarily? No, it doesn't. But I think the way everything has become tuned in, everything is plugged in too deeply into it. And I think that's a decision that could have a transformative effect. But who'd be brave enough to do that?
Which kind of brings me to probably the final points for our discussion. Because as I said, 2 hours fly fast when we have deep conversations like this. But going back to the point that I made before, that for me, I think business leaders need to start to do something more than what they're doing right now, which is practically nothing. I'm one of the very few in the world of tech, but I'm hoping there's more. I criticize, for example, investor class, the VCs and so on, but I'm starting to see some VCs that are starting to, for example, there's one, I'm not sure if he's public. His name is Roger Wade. He's a very well-known VC in the UK. Yeah. And he's very, pro-Palestine. And I'm trying to find it just out of interest, because I'm actually inviting him. I hope he's listening to the podcast. Roger, come. I would love to talk to you. I invited him already, but we'll see. But he is brave. He went out there, pro-Palestine, big VC. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, is there any other VC that is doing anything remotely that he's doing? Nope. Zip. But and I'm thinking, well, this is what we need. We need more. I mean, perhaps, okay, we've lost hope in politicians because people, like I said, in the UK, certainly people put a lot of hope on Labour. I mean, perhaps they're delivering whatever what you would expect the Labour government to deliver. But in terms of that, the messaging, that bravery is not there. Same thing we're seeing in the Democrats. Gavin Newsom is probably the only one that seems to be, fighting the fight, as opposed to, is it Chuck Schumer, who's the leader right now of Democrats, who says, yeah, I'll send a letter to complain. I'm like, okay, sure. All right. Good luck, mate. But I think, I mean, maybe I'm naive, but I truly believe that the world of business, because effectively we hold the cash. Unfortunately, there are the bad actors that want to take full advantage of this. We're seeing it right in front of us. But there's so many other business owners, leaders, CEOs who are like, no, I do not want to be part of it. I'm one of the early ones. I said, I do not want to be part of this. I'm doing what I'm doing right here. Like I said, VCs like Roger Wade, he's doing what he's doing. Amazing. But you were part of the system. You stuck your neck out in a big way, and you've faced abuse online as well. I've seen some of your interviews about that as well. So, many of us are doing it, but not enough. So what's your message for, leadership, even future leaders, future entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs that are listening to this podcast? What can they do to basically change the narrative so that we as the leaders outside politics can actually start controlling this narrative the way it needs to be?
If I was to try and end this conversation, Tim, with some advice, I think the one thing I want to get across to your audience is that this idea of trying to do the right thing and being aligned with your values and let that come through in your leadership, it doesn't have to be separate from business. It's not just about being an activist. It's not about working for a charity. It's not about campaigning for a particular cause. It's about understanding your value set and embodying that in everything that you do. And that doesn't mean you're shying away from making profit or having a successful career. It means that you will show up in a way that will be consistent all the time and that will outlast any fashions or any whims or any particular political headwinds that are out there, because you will have always been leading in a particular way. And I'm here to tell you that, I've had a career in public service where I've operated at the most senior levels. And this was the way I did it. This was the way that I got there. And this is the way that I continue to do it. And I still continue to act, to speak, and to lead. And that doesn't mean it has to be exclusive of success or that you have to set yourself up as some sort of sacrificial lamb or a martyr. You don't. But once you discover that alignment between who you are, how you show up, and acting sometimes out with yourself for something better, for something bigger, for embodying those values in the corner of the world that you occupy, it's transformative. It changes your life. I now lead in a particular way that I don't know how else to lead. I don't know any other way to do that. And it means that I say no to things, which perhaps other people would say yes to. But then that no is the no that allows me to sleep at night. And that no will be something I'll come back to in 2 years. And I'll have security in that because I did the right thing. And actually time has shown, yeah, actually that was the right thing to do. Now that is something I think that has been missold to people as this is the preserve of maybe politicians or activists. It's not. It belongs to all of us. And if we all embody it in our own particular way through the control and the circle of influence that we have, everything will shift and become that 1% better.
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier, that for me, the way I see it as part of your business planning as an entrepreneur has to be doing the right thing, because that's, in fact, there's evidence, and Apple actually jumped on this quite a while back, that customers, end users, customers in general, they actually now want more ethics in business. They actually demand it. And are you familiar with B Corp, the B Corp certification? And there's research that came out, a couple of research studies came out that's showing that a lot of the companies that went on the B Corp certification, they actually gained more customers. So even though they had to, not sacrifice profit, but they had to invest more into things like equality, sustainability, the things that the Farage types are fighting against. Well, guess what? Customers actually rewarding them for that. They want that. So the markets want that change. The markets want that leadership. So that's why I always find it astonishing when I see some CEOs and people in business that are just thinking, no, I want to play it safe. And I suppose I was guilty of that to some extent because I had shareholders in my previous companies and I'm not part of any of that anymore. But it's liberating. As you said, you kind of made this point right now that, you have the freedom to say no if you want to say no, right? You can sleep better at night. And it is so liberating. And I tell people it is liberating. Forget the PR, forget all that nonsense. Because frankly, I think the only people who care are the wrong people, in my opinion. Right? The right people, your customers, your family, they care about the important things. So which side do you want to be on? So I think you and I made that choice. So we're happy. We're absolutely happy. But if people want to find out more about your work, what are you up to these days?
So you'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. I set up a small leadership consultancy called True North Leadership. So using my voice, getting into organizations, public speaking, but also this idea, Tim, of unlocking moral courage. What does moral courage look like in leadership? I've spoken about it a lot today.
Yes.
Now, it's a passion project of mine to try and bring this into organizations so that organizations can cultivate it. It shouldn't be a single act of heroism or resistance. It should be a quality that's grown and nurtured in leaders. So, passion project, that's what I'm going to try and do.
Cool. Well, and all the links, as usual, in the description and in our in the I always forget what to call it these days. The episode page on coretort.com. So you guys see it's all in there. But Sal, my friend, thank you so much. Really appreciate this conversation. I think we're gonna have more because things are evolving fast. Unfortunately, not in the right direction, but we definitely need to carry on talking about it because that's the only way we can, I guess, fight the X machine.
100%. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Tim, and keep using your voice. It's important to have it out there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And you too. Like, we'll be there. You'll see the two of us all the time on LinkedIn ranting. So thank you so much, Sal.
Thank you, brother.
Well, my friends, this is it. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, before I go away, if you are on YouTube, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button below. It really makes a massive difference for the growth of our channel. And if you're following us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you need to give us a star review. Apparently, your following means nothing unless you give us a star review. Don't ask me why, but give us whatever star review that you think is fair. And if you're not following us, what are you doing? Come on, man. It doesn't cost you anything. It really makes a big difference. I really, really appreciate your support. But also, if you've got cash to spare, consider to become a founding member. We are an independent medium. We're not reliant on any kind of company that gets money from Russian oligarchs or any kind of weird sponsorships or anything like that. All of the companies that work with us are genuine companies that I know and I like. But ultimately, it's the members, you guys, our subscribers, our followers, our founding members, or those of you who actually just donated us like $1 here, a couple of bucks there, $5 there. All of that makes a big difference. This is what makes us truly independent. We're not chasing clickbait because we don't want clickbait. We want facts. We want the truth. We want something that we can all aspire to and something that truly make us at least work harder to make the world a better place. Not just talk about it, but actually make it happen. And of course, it supports all of our campaigns as well. So my friends, thank you so much. Much love. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.